solutions, how to help people go about dating in a different manner so that you can walk away with something tangible that you can do for your singles. He will share with us tools and wisdom to help you and your single children navigate the sometimes challenging time in their lives and guide them with research-based advice. We will leave some time at the end for questions, which you can post in the chat. And we ask that everyone please remain muted throughout the Zoom. Rabbi Dr. Yossi Al.
Thank you very much. I was trying to figure out how to start this, and I have the ability to do so in a manner that I believe nobody else on the planet can do. So I'd like to introduce you to your friendly presenter today. And this is his book on relationship coaching in Arabic. So that's my most unique claim to fame, and my book on relationships is now in Arabic. Okay. What we all want is for our children to have a smooth path towards marriage. We don't expect miracles, but we hope that they will, without too much difficulty, meet somebody suitable, be very happy, and give us much nachas. And I sincerely wish that upon you. The best thing could happen is that you don't need neither my website nor my advice or that of anybody else, but things work out wonderfully well. But the reality is that for many of us, it can be quite a difficult process. And that's why we're here today, because we do not want to see our young people, typically wonderful, intelligent, well brought up, go through years of struggles, especially if it's avoidable. So my father told me something a few days ago. I just thought I would begin with this. He said, the Pasuk says in last week's Shidduch, Yikach ish isha, lo yetze la sova. He says, when a person comes to get married, it shouldn't feel like a war. It shouldn't have to be a battle. And I thought that was a very correct way of summarizing the situation. It shouldn't have to turn into a slog for years of fighting with shadchanim, fighting with one's children, struggling in what we call sort of the Shidduch system. So just a few principles. I hope this can be as interactive as possible. And I've limited myself really to bullet points so that we can discuss. The most important thing I can share with you, and I hope if nothing else you'll take away, is the importance of asking why. As a parent, you cannot dictate to your child. I wouldn't advise that you try to. But our children typically will come to us, especially if we don't try to push our will on them. And we have the ability, not necessarily to tell them what to do, but to ask them the right questions. And pretty much everything we'll do today is focused around asking the right questions, especially the question why. You've met 12, 15 people over the past 24 months, and each time it hasn't worked out. Let's be curious. What is happening here? Is there something we ought to know? Is there something we don't yet understand? This is not, please trust me, not about blaming anybody. Nobody here is to blame. Everybody is wonderful. But it's painful to watch people struggle, and it makes sense to ask if there's anything we could understand about this in order to make things different, to get a better outcome. And when we say why, just so that people don't think I'm talking about psychological problems. I'm not even dreaming about psychological problems. Most people do not have any need for treatment or for any special help. Of course, there are those that do, and they do need to get help. I'm referring to people who are fine. They don't need to change. They cannot change. There's no issue with how they are as a person. But the way that that is coming across in dating is simply not working. And so the question is, what is it about the way that they're approaching it, the way that they're perceiving it, the way that they're reacting to things that is leading to this cycle of frustration? My second point, I call it the prevalence of stuckness. I think we underestimate how many people get stuck in Shidduchim. I have used this random number of 20%. I think it's pretty accurate. Approximately 1 in 5 people are going to get stuck. They're going to get stuck because either they can't figure out what they're looking for, because when they date, it just doesn't hit off, because they meet people and then they later on find it difficult to follow through. It could be because they're getting many rejections, but somehow they're stuck. And if we went from thinking that this was some kind of extreme, unusual anomaly that only happens to other people's children, and we were just ready to accept that it's the most normal thing in the world, it's just a common thing like anything else that we don't have a whole deal of difficulty accepting, is just the normal run of things. If you have 5 children, statistically, one of them is going to be stuck. Just understand it's normal. Then we can be much more prepared for when things aren't working out. Then we're asking ourselves, oh, this may be the one that's stuck. Okay, what are they stuck about? And the whole point about being stuck is that, I don't know if you've ever had anything get stuck in your life. It happens to me on a daily basis. It's usually very easy to get unstuck. I mean, I've had a car stuck in the snow. It's annoying, but it doesn't take a whole lot to get unstuck. You don't need a new car. You don't need to go into crisis mode. You don't need therapy. You just need to get unstuck. But if nobody even thinks that there's any stuckness, then nobody's going to even think to get unstuck. And so we stay in the same position with the wheel spinning around and around, and nothing really happens. Next point. I call this a diversity of dating experience. I think it took us decades to come to a point in our community where we understood this idea of multiple intelligences. We came to realize that not all children are the same. We came to accept as a matter of course that when we are educating our children, that we need to approach this in a variegated way, that we need to understand that children will learn differently. Well, when it comes to dating, we haven't yet come to the same awareness that not everybody will date in the same way. Of course, it's true that most people will, which is why you have something called normal, the regular way, what happens to most people. But that is no comfort to the people who are not in that category, to that 20% who are going to date their way. And if we understand that people can date in different ways, then we can also work out what it means for them. How can we help them to date their way successfully? And you'll see, I'm going to give examples and we're going to talk it through. But I want to start with the principle, which is how we agree to structure it. So people understand there's a logic to this. If you want to call it, there's a science to this. Once we understand that people are different and people are individuals, and we recognize that that everybody's going to have their own path to marriage, then it would be easier, I guess, if our children were in that 80% that were quote unquote normal and did everything the way that we assume they would. And then fine, we can send them on their way and hopefully it'll all work out fine. But we need to be ready to accept that when we come across somebody who's not having the easiest experience, that's very possibly because whatever they're doing is not suiting their, let's call it personality and their dating style. And my final principle by way of introduction, which I call the power of self-awareness. We are in America addicted to this idea of personal transformation. This idea that if only I get the right diet, or I'm able to convince myself of the right set of ideas, then I will become a new person and a much better person always, right? And if I haven't been able to transform myself, then it's because I haven't tried hard enough. So I'm to blame. So let me just burst the bubble. in your own imagination, perhaps you can do that. In reality, we don't have the ability to just transform ourselves. We are who we are. We spent many, many years becoming this person, and we're not about to change overnight. But you don't need to. You don't even, every time a client tells me, I'm looking for someone who's growth oriented, I said, well, why don't you marry a tree? Why are we so obsessed with everybody growing, right? Why can't you just love and accept the person as they are? There's nothing wrong with them. Leave them alone, right? What we need to recognize is we don't need to change. We don't need to be transformed, but we need to be self-aware. If one understands oneself, then everything starts to fall into place. Things start to make sense. Things which are hard become more tolerable. And mistakes which you would routinely make, you now know that they are a mistake and you have the option to avoid. I think that these 4 principles could really change. I'll be modest and I'll say, change the situation for at least 50% of our older singles. By the way, a term I absolutely detest, but I don't have a better term. So literally for every other person who's been in the Shidduch system longer than they or anybody else would want, these principles are enough to change the outcome. The other 50%, I'm not going to be so bold. But it would make a massive difference if we could just recognize this. And I only spoke to a mother today, and she was telling me how her daughter is thinking of quitting because the guy kind of wasn't handling things so well. It just kind of wasn't coming together correctly. And she was getting discouraged and just thought, there's no point continuing. And I said, this is where the Shidduch tragedy comes in. This young man was carefully selected after many resumes and careful research. And in fact, he matches up on paper. Another term I don't particularly like, on paper. Well, I'm not even sure what that means, but it's a good fit. Somebody did their homework and came up with a good Shidduch, and it works. But because he has got something wrong in the Shidduch process, he hasn't figured out how to get across in the right way, and because he's messing it up, the answer is to get rid of him, as opposed to someone to have a word with him and say, look, she thinks you're great, but there's something about the way that you're coming across, it's not working. Can we figure out how you can present yourself better? That's just one example from a few hours ago. I think that if we approached it this way, we could help a lot of young people to stay who they are. We love them as they are, but just be a little smarter about things and be a little bit more clued up about why they may be having a hard time. And that small tweak can be the difference between another failure, another frustration, or a wonderful engagement. Mrs. Berkowitz, if you would like to, at this point, bring up any questions, I'd be happy to take them. Otherwise, we'll go to section 2. Move on. Okay. So we're going to now look at some pretty much random examples of things which young people are dealing with, singles are dealing with. And from what I can tell, mostly we're not talking about. In other words, these are not things that typically shadchanim and parents, from what I can tell, are able to identify and say, oh, look, something seems wrong over here. So let me just go through a few examples. Again, I'm going to be brief because I want to leave time for conversation. Over the past few months, I have found more and more, increasingly, that I'm dealing with what I call low-level issues. These are not the kind of dramatic, exciting stories, but people who are lacking dating skills, who are showing up to a date and it's just not hitting off. They don't seem to know how to convey affection, to express emotion, to make the other person feel wanted, feel valued. And I have a phrase now, which I'm beginning to repeat almost every hour. I have to find a new one just because I'm getting bored with it. This idea you're on a date to make the other person feel good about themselves. I said, of course, you're also there to find out if that person is suitable for you and whether you would like to continue to get to know them. But that's obvious. What's not so obvious is that that person has come at great personal risk to themselves to sit there and bare their soul and talk about themselves in a very personal way. The least you could do is make sure that they walk away feeling really good about themselves, feel validated, feel empowered, feel appreciated. Even if at the end of the day, you decide you're not going to continue with it, you will at least have ensured that you did your job to give that person the best possible dating experience you could. And it seems a lot of people are obviously doing this instinctively, because when you like somebody or when you're trying to make a nice impression, you're going to do everything in your power to come across right. But there is this 20%, there are a bunch of people who they mean well. I don't believe they go with the intention of being dismissive or being aloof or being uncaring. But the constant complaint, I'm not feeling any emotion. It doesn't seem like he even wants to be there. He's not really coming across properly. I can't hold a decent conversation with him. And we hear this over and over again. So this isn't some kind of dramatic thing, but it seems to me to be probably the most common example of where people are getting stuck. We're not taught these skills in yeshiva or in seminary. And we don't have any other opportunity, realistically, maybe going on with Soyim, but we don't really have an opportunity to perfect our interpersonal skills very much. Those of us who are naturally inclined to that, they have no problem at all. But there's enough of us for whom dating is really not a good fit, for whom dating is basically a nightmare. It's not something they enjoy. It's not something they're good at. It's basically for them a lesson in humiliation. It's a form of torture to go out there and have to do something to the absolutely peak performance when you're completely useless at it from the very beginning. And so I think we need to recognize that when we have people who we hear that the same complaint that their person they're meeting just doesn't feel anything, then we need to recognize that that is something that can be corrected with very little effort. In fact, Blinade, I'm going to post on my website, Bimhera V'Yameinu, for free, for everyone to benefit, a full list of ways we can avoid this, okay? I'm going to give you everything I know and more, right? So you can see that this isn't just big talk. There are real simple things we can do, including some of my special secrets, which I came up with myself, so that people can see that this is something we absolutely can teach people. How you make another person feel better about themselves, how you're able to make the person feel that you're there because you want to be there. You may notice I don't smile. I almost never laugh. So if I like somebody, it may not be so obvious on my face. I'm a very serious person. What can I do? I'm an intellectual. So what happens in a person like me who doesn't beam like a Cheshire cat? I don't know if you know what that is, right? With this big smile, and they're so smug because they're basking in the glory of the state, right? They're pensive and they're serious and they're caught up in their own thoughts and they're completely kind of insecure and there are 1,000 things rushing through their head, none of which they're aware, but which shows in their face, which is expressionless. There's a way of being able to make sure that you're not relying on your natural expressions, that you can make sure the person knows how you think and what you feel by making sure that you get that across. And that comes in words, but also in actions in different ways, which I will maybe share more later, but I will definitely publish the full list of everything I have in mind. Next thing. This is something that a lot of people will find almost impossible to believe. So I'm putting my reputation on the line here, but this is the truth. Many people have what I call a disruptive brain. What it means is that the brain is made up of multiple parts, not just physically, although that's true, but also psychologically. And it's possible for a part of our mind to basically go rogue and become disruptive and essentially undermine anything functional. And this can happen in a variety of ways. So I don't want to overgeneralize, things are complicated, but the basic principle isn't complicated. Just imagine you had a 6-year-old in your head, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, telling you, you don't know what you're doing, right? Or you're about to make a terrible mistake, or you're not good enough, or whatever it may be. But just imagine that continuously. And just imagine that this 6-year-old has got one goal above all else, never that you're going to get married. You stay single, whatever it takes. And so they will hound you and harass you. This part of you will literally drive you nuts. I have a client who's been calling me every other day for the past month, and literally every other day, to go through the same thing again, that nothing has changed. And every single time he goes away saying, yes, yeah, you're right, everything's okay. And then 2 days later, can I speak to you again? You have no idea what torture he goes through. That's an extreme case, but I have a young lady, not a whole lot better. Also, right, because all her friends had vacation homes, and her family did not have a vacation home. And she feels that she lost out and feels deprived, and that whole thing has triggered a weird reaction in her brain that's literally driving her crazy, and it seems powerless to shake off. Seems nuts, but I'm telling you, this is what's going on. We need to recognize that people can look completely healthy. They have nothing wrong with them. They're not bipolar. There's no need for treatment. There's nothing that you can do anyway. But they do have a complicated brain that can allow them to be continuously hounded in this way. And they need a lot of encouragement and support if they're going to get married. And we would not expect that. We would never even suspect it. But it is nevertheless a fact that some people will experience this, and they will experience it in ways which are truly confusing to anybody. But it is still happening. And I don't know if I can do this, but maybe I'll post an article about this too, because if people would read it and understand what these people go through, remember, this is not a psychological disorder. This is just being them. But if we could not tell them they're nuts, and instead understand that they're going through something really tough, and actually for them to get engaged and get married requires tremendous courage, we would not only have great respect, but also great compassion for what they have to go through. But this is a normal thing, and it's not one or two people. One of those types of brain disruptions, which brings me to my next point, is one that's much better understood. It's called avoidance. People call it commitment phobia, but that's just not the correct term. What it means is that certain people will be really good at dating until it gets serious, and then everything starts to fall apart, because immediately they start having, stress reaction, they get very anxious, and they start to look for 100 different reasons why it's a really bad idea to go forward. If they can't think of a good enough one, they maybe stall it until it literally dies a death. And this is not something that's so unknown, but it's something that is more common than the other type, and it's something which affects probably around 3% of people. Okay. So when it comes to this, what happens is that I was just talking to a not such a young man, a 28-year-old today, and explaining to him that when he thinks about the person he's dating, instead of seeing this as something that he wants, which is what he does, he's overwhelmed by fear, he's overwhelmed by apprehension. And the more he thinks about being close to this person, the more he feels stressed and triggered, to the point where it seems insane that you would want to marry somebody who makes you feel this miserable and this stressed out. And we need to understand that this is, unlike the disruptive brain thing, which is pretty uncommon, thankfully. This is not uncommon. About 3% of all people will have some degree of avoidance. And some of them will have it to quite a significant degree that would make them feel almost impossible to marry the person that they're supposed to be proposing marriage to. And it is possible, as we'll see later, to get around these things. But if we don't understand that this is even happening, then we're only able to sort of tell people, do it anyway, or quit. We don't have any way to offer them an understanding of what's going on and enable them to realize what's happening inside of their beautiful head. And for a final example of the kind of things that are affecting our singles is what I call a fixation on appearance. And I want to be clear, I'm not judging people at all. First of all, I'm definitely not judging people because they feel that the person the appearance of the person they're dating is important. This is not me being naive. I understand even the Gemara says, Ein Isha Ela Yofi. I understand that even as a famous Mishnah in relation to Tu B'Av, right? That the beautiful women drew attention to their beauty. I'm not trying to make out as if women shouldn't feel that their attractiveness is something positive for them, or that men should be shut down because they have an interest in the appearance of their wife to be. But here we're talking about a fixation. A fixation is when the appearance issue overrides everything else to the point that it doesn't matter whatever else is going on, it becomes nullified because of their attachment to a particular issue of appearance. And not only is it unhealthy because it's so overriding and all-consuming, which makes no sense, because surely that's not the only thing that matters when you're talking about your life partner. But with the fixation, it's not coming from an actual interest in the person's appearance per se. So therefore, even if you date the most beautiful man or the most beautiful woman, it won't help you. Because the reason why you're fixated is not because you just genuinely have a desire for a certain type of attraction, a certain type of appearance, certain type of attractiveness is what I meant to say. But the real reason why you're fixated is because you have some internal barriers which make it harder for you to really be motivated to put in the effort to date. And you convince yourself that if only the person you were dating was somehow insanely attractive or insanely intelligent or insanely talented, or preferably all three, that then you would be so enamored by them and so overcome by their amazingness that you would somehow find it in yourself to overcome all of the things that have been holding you back until now. And so we put this tremendous premium on the other person having the qualities that we would want, and believe that once, if they could inspire us and motivate us to such a degree, we would be freed of all of our inhibitions, and we would finally come forward in our full glory and make magic happen. There's only one problem. In the entire history of the human race, it has never succeeded once. If your problem is that you have internal barriers, no outside person is going to take that away. Doesn't matter how good they look or how amazing they are. In the end, if you're struggling, then that is what is going to need to be addressed. And so when let's say a parent and your child comes and says, I'm just constantly coming up with the same thing, that this appearance issue is not what I was hoping for. You're not there to berate them, but look for patterns. If this keeps happening, why? Think about it. Nowadays, most people have seen a picture of the person they date. So your son or your daughter saw what this person looked like, and they were happy to date them on that basis. So what happens? Every single time it turns out it was photoshopped, right? What all of a sudden, like, they're so unlucky, and every person that they meet is somehow so much worse in reality than they are on the picture. From my experience, the resume pictures are terrible. I think people should do better on the resume pictures, not worse. The reason why they're not happy is not because the person is genuinely not attractive enough. They chose to date them knowing what they look like, but they're struggling with something themselves. And I can count on no fingers at all how many times people have come to me and said, you know what, someone told me that the reason why I'm making such an issue out of appearance or something else that's taking over everything and blinding me to any other issues or any other factors is something to do with my own struggles. They either would just say, well, I guess you have to find somebody you find attractive. Let's see if you find somebody else. Or they'll call them shallow and vain and superficial and picky and whatever, which is not helpful at all and is not even true. So I think we need to recognize that if people keep saying no to things, it's very likely it's not because of the things that they said no to, but because there's something that's making them find it hard to say yes. And when we know that, we can have a completely different way of approaching things. So that's the end of section 2.
So we do have a couple of questions if you want to pause now and take them, or do you want to leave it for the end?
Yeah, I can consult my book in Arabic in case I need anything. Yes, go for it.
Okay, so Someone is asking how to guide your child without influencing their decision.
I'm
Child
happy to answer the
initiative,
question,
right?
but I'm happy to answer the question, but I just don't want anybody to think that I agree with the question. There's nothing wrong with influencing someone's decision, as long as the influence is good and is not manipulative when somehow underhand, like for example, the parent has an interest in it happening for their own reasons and is trying to convince the child that they should see it the same way. That's not an honest conversation. But I see no problem with people influencing each other. That's what I think is normal. But I'm going to come back to what I said before. Ask questions. When you ask a question, the other person has an opportunity to reflect on what you've asked and see if they can come up with a good answer. For example, as I just spoke about this now, it's easy because my memory is bad, but not that bad. I just spoke about fixation on appearance. So let's just run with that for a second. This is now the 10th time that somebody's come back and complained appearance isn't good enough. Okay, so you don't say to them, I think you're being ridiculous here. You keep saying no to everything. What's wrong with you? Or what are the Shadchanim going to think about this every time you come back? They think you're the most shallow person and you consider yourself to be a Choshev London, right? All of this is not helpful. But you could ask a question like, did you see the picture before? Did you see the picture all other times? What was the difference between what was on the picture and what you saw? Why do you think if the picture was okay, you weren't happy when you met the person? Why is it that the appearance thing seems to be so overwhelming that despite you're telling me how many other wonderful qualities she has, it seems that that does nothing to impact upon your overall impression of the person? So these are questions. Now, if a person says, I don't want to answer your questions, well, of course, then you can't force them to. But these are honest questions. This is not manipulation. This is not you trying to insult their intelligence. You're asking the questions which need to be asked. And if you don't have answers to it, well, then we need to find answers.
Okay. Someone is asking if the guy is more reserved at first. How many dates would it be normal to expect them to be themselves? And how much time to wait and say that it's still an early stage and let's give it time? So how patient do we need to be to see this person come alive and show their true colors?
It's a difficult one because it very much depends on both parties. If you have a very reserved female meeting a very reserved male, you wonder sometimes if it's ever going to change, because who's going to be the one to make the change? If one side is reserved, the other side less so, then you may have a different calculation. So I'm just a bit reluctant to give some kind of magic number that someone's going to say, Yossi Ives says it's 3 dates. I think that's a bit oversimplistic. But can I again disagree with the question? I know this is really annoying by now. I don't think the question is about how many dates before you throw in the towel. How many dates before somebody says something to somebody, maybe this guy needs a bit of guidance? Because again, my favorite dislike, on paper, it looks very good. My daughter says she, likes a lot about him. He seems to have, good midas. He came highly recommended, whatever. But this is not a mutual admiration society, and she doesn't see it going anywhere this way. So why not the Shadchan calls up the mother of the young man and says, my daughter, the daughter of your whatever, I got all muddled up now. The young lady thinks your son is wonderful, but he's not coming across in a way that's she feels is going to work. Do we have to wait until she throws her hands up in despair, right? Before we kind of do something? Maybe he needs, maybe he's stuck, right? Why is it such a insult? Do you know the thing which actually, if I had to go for psychological treatment, this would be the reason. Do you know how many times I've spoken to people, I'm talking hundreds now, who've told me that they didn't feel comfortable telling around to the person they're dating to say, look, the way you're presenting yourself, the way you're coming across is not working for me. They say, I don't feel comfortable saying it to the person. We've only met 3 times. Almighty God, you're not comfortable saying to this person that you're having a difficulty with the way they're dating, but you are willing to say goodbye for the rest of your life, I shall never see you again, get lost. That's not at all insensitive. So it's insensitive to be truthful and honest to somebody about what's going on. Nothing at all insensitive to tell the shadchan, I'm done with this guy, goodbye. We've got it back to front. So we need to realize that it's not an insult when you say to somebody, this person is wonderful. We chose, my daughter and us, we chose to date your son because you thought your son is great. And you know what? He is great. And everything on the resume is true. He is a gentleman. He is intelligent, right? But a husband and wife, you need to have a certain bond, and it's not even getting close. Nothing is happening there, right? This is not you're not auditioning to be a chavrusa. So instead of trying to decide how quickly do you get rid of the guy, why don't we say, how quickly do we decide to say something so we can save this relationship?
So to add to that question, someone was asking about this person that you referred to that, let's say, kind of shows a blank face, no emotion. How do we just know that perhaps he has no personality or seems to be enough? Why are we assuming that it's there and he's not showing it? So I guess this is where an open conversation with the person in front of you would be very helpful.
You know, before, because I'm very famous for my modesty, I said before 50%. The reason is because I recognize that there are always exceptions. And last thing I want is people discredit everything I'm saying because they say, you know, I've had some real horror stories and you're making out as if everything's peaches and cream and it's only misunderstandings. No, there are horror stories where you meet somebody and literally there's no pulse. I don't know if they dug him out of the grave or something, but the guy shows up and there's nothing, right? What is this guy doing on a date? I check it's illegal to date a corpse, right? Yeah, there are. So I want everyone on this session to know I'm not invalidating them. Some of your children have had real difficulty. You met somebody and the person shouldn't have been on this date. This person is not ready for it. This person is maybe still stoned, or this person has not grown up yet, or this person's got issues they've never dealt with, or this person has forgotten that there's such a thing called an iron. Right? And if you're going to show up on a date, can you at least come in a shirt that looks minimally respectable, right? Not every single thing is excusable, right? But many times, it's not there is no personality. It's that this person has not really been given any guidance. I'm thinking of a young gentleman. I won't give the age, although there's plenty of people his age, but he's not young. He unfortunately came from a home where the father was really abusive and anger was rampant. And he grew up in a home in which he had to suppress his normal emotions just to survive. And then he shows up on a shidduch, and of course, right, trust, he gave up all that decades ago. Love, what exactly? Love your parents when they've traumatized you. All those emotions you need to be able to show on a date, he's locked them away and he's forgotten even where he locked them. It's been so many years since he last thought about these things. And all of a sudden he's bereft because he doesn't have access to the things you cannot date without. So we need to help him to learn how to date properly. Or if you don't mind me using the expression, date well. So I think we need to work on the assumption that if you've done your research and people have said basically nice things, why do we have to assume that this person is an emotional cripple as opposed to somebody who really struggles with something and with the right guidance can do much better?
And I suggest, I think that sometimes when you're having a conversation with your shafin, if you're opening up to bring up some of the things that are holding you back, and they give over that information, oftentimes the other party can step it up if they know that that's what's holding you back.
Mrs. Berkowitz, my big dream, because I'm Joseph the Dreamer, right? My big dream is that we have a much wider group of people who do feel capable of guiding somebody through this I'm going to publish this article, I told you, with everything on it, unedited, right? But it doesn't mean to say just because you read it, you're all of a sudden proficient in everything there. And it may require for people to sit down with this young man or this young woman and kind of tailor it to their needs and give them a chance to rehearse it and to get comfortable with it, because you're asking them to do things that don't come easy. Okay. So the more we have people who can actually do this, the more we have enablers and facilitators and activists, matchmakers who are not just giving names, but are really taking people and taking them through the process. We will double the number of successes.
Okay. The next question is something I would like you to address, and I'm going to reword it for them. Talking about feelings and how much you need to feel by the time you get engaged. If somebody's being protective of themselves or less emotional, I would like if you can please, there's a term that everybody is so well aware of, and they use it either to their benefit or hamshacha. The Rebbe said you need to have hamshacha, and I'm not feeling it. Can we pause for a moment and define what does that mean, and how much do you need to feel, and what is realistic, and how much of it is expectation and not necessarily what we're waiting for?
You ask me if I can define it. The answer is no, right?
Okay.
Not because I don't know how to do it, but because it cannot be done and it should not be attempted either, right? One of the principles with which we begun is that there is a diversity of dating experiences, and that it cannot be that we speak about the word hamshacha or hamshacha salev as if everybody is in exactly the same boat. The minute we do that, we are condemning 20% of our young people to a horror show. We're basically imposing on them the rules that apply to everybody else. Well, I can tell you that as somebody who grew up in the education system that imposed on me a set of principles that were supposed to be good for everybody else, I'm not sure if that's true even, but for me, absolutely didn't work. I ended up the exact person I am today, and no amount of pressure worked. In other words, to say we should not assume that the rules that apply to the 80% have to apply to the 20%. So if you ask me, what does hamshacha salev mean for the 80%? I will say to you, I will gladly give you a definition, but it's a total waste of time because those people have no problem whatsoever and there's no need to debate it, okay? The problem we have is that we have 20% who struggle with it. And for them, they're not all the same, right? Everybody's issue is different. So if you know the famous thing about the Yetzer Hara and Yetzer Tov, we all have the same Yetzer Tov, our Yetzer Haras are all different. When it comes to our struggles, we are all different. And that means to say that hamshacha salev for a person who has a part of their brain that is absolutely hostile, and there's nothing you're going to do to change that. And I'm telling you, you can do whatever you want. The only thing that will change it is what's known as a frontal lobotomy. For those of you who know what I'm talking about, that's very funny, okay? It means a carving out a significant portion of the brain, okay? It is not possible to expel that voice. So hamshacha salev for that person is never going to be a unanimity. There's always going to be that 6-year-old in your head shouting and screaming, no way, no way. I'm going to do everything to cripple you, lest you actually go ahead and get married. So for that person, hamshacha salev means everything but that voice. For a person who struggles with avoidance and for whom getting engaged is an absolutely terrifying experience, how can hamshacha salev be the same as for somebody who's literally on cloud 9? And the only question is whether the sun is shining through her eyes or the moon as well. Okay, so we're all different. And one of the things I spoke at a previous webinar, I think some people didn't like what I said, but I think we've taken this hamshacha salev thing and we fetishize it. We've basically oversimplified it, right? I don't know if we do the same with every other teaching of the Rebbe. I doubt it somehow, right? We kind of understand that it's nuanced. And we've taken something like this and applied it to everybody exactly the same and in equal measure, and it simply doesn't work like that.
Okay.
I can go if you want to a couple of at least 2 or 3 items for my next section, because we're coming to the end of our hour. I'm not going to be able to go into this with any level of detail that would be able to properly give you a sense of what a young person would go through if I were to actually do this with them. It's not a 3-second thing. But I wanted you nevertheless to understand some of the tools which can be used so that you at least walk away with a bit more confidence that it's not just, nice talk, but we actually are things that can help people to gain the self-awareness. So again, this is very random because, what are you supposed to choose? It's very difficult to know, but I'll give you a couple of examples. One is something I call the 3 choices. What it comes down to is this. When we approach dating, some people do so with a very clear focus. They want to get married. They need to think what qualities they need in a marriage partner. And so they quickly realize some things are more important than others, and no problems at all. There are other people who treat it like going to a candy shop. I've taken my kids to candy shops. They're pretty well behaved, but when you're very young and you see hundreds of candies, it's very difficult to choose. And so you kind of want a bit of everything, and very quickly that becomes a problem. And so what we understand is that it's very, very easy to rule yourself out of the running. Even with just as many as 3 choices, you're already in trouble. So I'm going to illustrate this to you very quickly. If you want to get a t-shirt, so you go to Macy's, okay? Now notice I was very generous. The t-shirt is not included in your first choice. That is your free, okay? Because that's the starting position. You're not looking for shoes, you're looking for a t-shirt. Okay, now let's see what happens. So you come to Macy's and you are looking for a t-shirt, but you want it to be a red t-shirt. Well, what percentage of t-shirts in Macy's are red? Let's assume it's 10%. Now you want this, you want it to be a long sleeve t-shirt. What percentage of t-shirts in Macy's are red and long sleeved? Probably 1. So in the whole of Macy's, all 3 floors, you're down to 1 t-shirt. If you now decide you want the t-shirt to have a black stripe or some black in it to match your black pants, you will not find a single one in the whole of Macy's. And if you decide to go to any other store, you likely will find that none of them have a red t-shirt which has long sleeves and some black on it. And that's with 3 choices, and you will not find it. What people need to understand is it takes very little to make it impossible to find what you're looking for, right? This is not because somebody's discriminating against you and because you didn't come from the right family or don't have the right nose. This is simply because, unfortunately, there's this annoying thing called math, right? And it won't bend to meet your illusion, right? To satisfy your fantasy. And so when people realize how quickly it's possible to rule it out. So for example, if somebody says, I want somebody who's 6 foot tall, in our community, that means, this is a female who wants a man who's 6 foot tall, 80% are ruled out. Only 20% of people are 6 foot or above. Now you decide you want somebody who's also got a university degree. That eliminates about 80% of those who are 6 foot tall. So you're now down to just 20% of your 20%. And now you want the person to have a certain hair color. It's possible that even if you have 1,000 people on your list, you will not find even 1 who matches those 3 things. And that's just 3 requirements, and you won't find even 1. And if you add it to 2,000 on your list, maybe you'll find 1. Now, who says that 1 person is going to marry you? That would be pretty amazing. In other words, it takes almost nothing to make it impossible to get married. And that's not me, that's actual science. Okay, we've tested this every different way. We know that you cannot beat the system. These numbers will not disappear just because we don't like them or we find them annoying. And so when young people do the math and they go through this and they understand that their choices, each time they make a choice, it's not a regular choice, not like an average, they're quickly eliminating the vast majority of people they could possibly meet. They can see how very quickly they essentially made themselves impossible to match up. And so that's not about trying to push people to settle for less or trying to get people to accept they're not as good as they think. This doesn't make a difference. You could be absolutely the hottest catch in the whole of Lubavitch. The mathematics doesn't change for you either. And so it's something we can help people through to understand how their choices affect what their prospects are. And of course, here's what the problem is. They say, well, I'm going to get that 1 in 1,000 because, there's still 1 in 1,000. So I'm going to get that 1 in 1,000 and I'm going to make her want me. Okay, gesundheit. Unfortunately, 1 in 1,000 is not a very high statistical probability. And so it may be that it doesn't just happen so quickly. In the meantime, it's gone from 1 in 1,000 to 1 in 5,000 because in the last 2 years, while you were trying to figure it out, all the others have got married already. And so with time, it becomes even fewer, and you're looking for a needle in the haystack. And so it's possible for people to better understand the actual numbers, and it helps them to make sense of what they're doing. I'll give you one other example of how people can see things more clearly when you show them what's actually going on. I've had people all the time who come to me and say, the questioner asked before, I am not feeling it as much as I believe I should, as much as I would want to make this kind of commitment. We all know why, because they've struggled with something that's making that very hard. And how are they supposed to know whether this is the right thing? Okay. And there are a series of things we can do. I can't go through everything. But for people like this, it's extremely important, and this is where parents have a massive role, to understand that the way science works is this. You start out, first of all, with your criteria, then you test it, and you see how it matches. You cannot make up the criteria after you've done the research. That would be way too convenient, okay? So if people have set very, very rigorous requirements for what's important to them, and straight hair never made it onto that list, then you can never not want to marry somebody because they have straight hair. Okay, you make your list extremely robust. You don't rush into it. You ask the person 1,000, is there anything else that's really important for you? And if the answer is no, this is my list, say, right, well, if we find somebody who matches this to a sufficient degree, which is around 80% compatibility, right? Then you admit that this is somebody suitable for you. So then you're not going to quit because you're struggling with your emotions. Because you know why you're struggling with emotions, because you have certain struggles. And so we go through a process here where we ask a person to prioritize their requirements, then to match, because that way you can give a greater weight to something higher up on the list and less weight to something lower down on the list. We'll then ask them to rate the person they're dating by comparison to their criteria. And then we can do a simple thing. We take out your calculator and you ask us, what's the total number that you've rated this person against your own criteria? And from what I've seen many, many times, I'd say probably 95% of the time, when people have had a proper dating experience and they did everything correctly, which is mostly what people do. They chose who to date, they dated them multiple times, and they got to really know the person. It turns out that the reason why they're still dating them after 12 dates is because there is very, very high levels of compatibility by their own estimation. Well, if the compatibility is this high, then according to the science, your chances of having a long and happy marriage is about 99%. So the chances of you doing better than 99% is basically zero, okay? So there's no way in the world that there's anybody you'll ever meet in the world who's going to be more suitable than this person. Now you tell me, what's the logical thing to do? Nobody in their right mind thinks it's logical to quit at this point, right? So there are ways of helping people, even when they're really struggling to make the right choices for them. And I don't know if this properly sort of, because I rushed it so quickly, I would maybe have been great if I could actually take somebody through a live exercise and you see how effective it is. When you help a person to see clearly, you can help people to get to make decisions about who to marry, even when it's extremely difficult for them, because they can see clearly, and there is no way they can justify, there's no way they can keep holding on to this idea, I'm making a terrible mistake. Those numbers don't lie. Those numbers speak for themselves, and they should give you every confidence that this is a sound decision. So if I can just wrap it up, and then Mrs. Berkowitz, you can take questions or whatever, but just to say, dear parents, I'm a parent myself. A parent of 2 married and several unmarried. I'm not speaking to strangers. I'm speaking to my own kind, my own community, my own, what do you call it, brothers and sisters. I'm not being flippant here. I don't think there are magical solutions. I'm not making out as if everything is just, if only you just opened your mind. I understand people have challenges. People have been through different traumas. People have suffered bullying, or they've maybe got a lisp. One of my clients has a heavy lisp, right? Some people are significantly overweight, and not everybody's so kind towards that. We could go on. I know that life is tough, and it's not always easy, and it doesn't mean just because you came to my webinar or our webinar, right, that now everything's solved. But I do hope you take away sincerely from my heart, half of the problem we can solve simply by realizing that our young people need better insight and to break away from this binary situation, which I was telling this mother today, where it's either a choice of continue or quit. Those are not the choices. My friends, please, those are not the choices. It's not a choice of either keep going or quitting, right? The choice should be, how can I support this couple, right? You only think about continuing or quitting when you've literally run out of all options, and now it's a case of just tossing a dice, rolling a dice, right? That's not really how we run our lives. You wouldn't run your business like that, right? So if we see that our son or our daughter is dating and is struggling, and we're thinking, should we push them to go on another date, or should we tell them to end it here? Can I ask you, before you answer that question, ask yourself, is that even the right question? Is it really a question of just continuing blindly or giving up? Is it not fair to say that there's a third option, which is, what is it that may be happening here that is preventing what could be the happiest couple on God's earth from finding that happiness because somebody does not understand something that they need to understand? And think what could happen. How many people who were at the edge of despair, and somebody stepped in and said, I think you need to do this, that, and the other. I'll just give you a dumb example and I will end. I'm dealing with a person who's absolutely awful at conveying anything. It's really, it's a horror show. And she doesn't want to continue. He is not sure, but he feels he should. Anyway, I'm colluding with a shadchan. It's a bit of a behind the scenes intrigue. But basically, I've managed to persuade this young man we did an investigation. We had to go to a whole bunch of people to find out what her favorite food was. And now to get him to understand that he needs to go and order sushi, the exact type of sushi she likes, which turns out to be, I never even knew it existed, but apparently I've learned something, right? And make sure that 2 hours before the Zoom meeting, she gets the arrival of a favorite sushi, right? This guy doesn't know how to express emotion. Show it with the sushi, right? Play along at least, right? What I'm saying to you is, I have no idea what's going to happen. Maybe we'll come back and I'll tell you the end of the story. The Zoom meeting is on Sunday, right? But imagine that she sees that sushi. She says, how the heck did he know? Exactly the one I like, right? And maybe that will be the moment she says, you know what, he's trying. And all of a sudden, this total thing, which was supposed to be over and done with, has a new chance at success. So please, let's not treat it like either we continue without this, like put our head down and just keep, grin and bear it, as they say in England, right? Or, right, the famous one, what's it, keep strong and carry on, whatever it is, I've forgotten how it goes even, right? Or we just say, enough, I put my son through enough of it, it's not working out, let's just stop it. And let's ask, what if we could help this couple to success?
That's fantastic. I'm being asked, and I'm not surprised, what is the best way to contact you, Dr. Ellis?
Telepathy. I'm not hard to get hold of.
Good luck, everyone.
I'm not hard. I'm quite high up on the list of America's Most Wanted. My email address is yossi@tagdevelopment.org or info@datewell.org. A bunch of other email addresses, and I have a phone number which can be posted. It's been posted already by my wife. My cover has been blown. I don't want people to get the impression that I can realistically spend all day answering people's curious questions, because that would be overwhelming. But I really do hope that together, all of us together, can work to guide our young people towards success. And for the Shadchanim to also be part of this. So when a young person says, my parents are so annoying, they keep asking me these questions. Apparently there's this guy, I don't know, Ives or something, tells them to ask questions, right? We all need to sing from the same hymn sheet here. We need to have The Shadchanim also saying, well, your parents are asking these questions because they want, they think you would benefit by figuring out the answers. They're not telling you what to think. They're just asking the questions. And I'm asking the questions. Why do I want to put you through another failed Shidduch? I actually have somebody in mind for you. Call her name Sterni, I don't know, right? I have somebody in mind for you, but I'm just very nervous because this one is really special. And if it goes wrong, it'll be a disaster, right? How can we work together to make sure this one really works?
Thank you so much, Dr. Ives. You certainly left everyone with very useful information and practical advice that they can implement to help their children move forward and Eretz Hashem get to football. So we have a nice audience. If I can ask you to leave everyone with just one final message, a point that you'd really love to drive home, have them share with their friends, one thought to hang on to. Key phrase, what would that be?
Don't pressure your children, support them.
Beautiful, love it. Thank you everyone for joining us. I know I have gained a tremendous amount of knowledge and I hope that everyone